Publius argues that there is a peculiar genius of the American people that leads or supports republicanism, and similarly, Rome was viewed as having a certain civic genius among its peoples. How would you characterize the genius of the American people as Republicans compared to the genius of the Romans as Republicans?
To first point out the genius of the Roman citizens during the Republic, I would say that the genius comes from a great respect for the senators and for the plebeians at that time. And I would say that American genius today is rather the skepticism that arises.
And by this skepticism, I think Catherine means the skepticism that arose out of the experience with Britain, because the revolution wasn't quite so revolutionary. They were simply taking back the rights that were guaranteed to them by the English Bill of Rights and the rights of Englishmen. So Americans were not tolerant of a government that can arbitrarily take away their rights, so they became very skeptical at the time of our founding.
I think also another similarity is that in the Roman Republic, every citizen had this national pride. At the same time, they still retained their own origins. In our society today, we can see that although we classify ourselves through our origins, we still have this great pride in being American.
And this is exemplified in E pluribus unum, out of many one.
Yes. Sorry, I had my question working there, and you said that the revolution was not so revolutionary. What does that mean?
Well,
What I meant was that the rights that were violated, the grievances that were outlined in the Declaration of Independence, are all the rights that were enumerated to them by the Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, Petition of Habeas Corpus Act, so on. And in a sense, they felt that they were treated differently than the people in Britain than as Englishmen in America. For instance, they were, even though it says that you cannot quarter soldiers in people's homes in the English Bill of Rights, they had the same thing happen. They were victim of that infringement of a right.
Okay.
So that's why they were simply readjusting their rights.
Okay, the founders didn't seem to be that they were afraid of two different things, and I think the same thing was true of the Romans. Afraid of tyranny on the one hand, that we've spoken about, fear of chaos on the other, if there is not an adequate government. Of which were they most afraid?
I believe the founders were most distrustful of chaos on the one hand. The Constitutional Convention was called into session largely because of Shays' Rebellion, where farmers and disgruntled farmers in Massachusetts rebelled against their colonial government. So I believe that the founders had more so of a distrust for the masses.
I disagree. I think they were more afraid of tyranny because they were very influenced by Montesquieu, who criticized the Roman system of government.
Go ahead. Please finish.
Government, because the consuls could introduce the law, they could determine the punishment for when the law would be broken. That's why they wanted to distinctively separate the powers of an executive in the judicial branch and the legislative branch to prevent those consolidations of power.
Thank you.
Well, there's certainly a lot of energy in this panel. Let us give you some feedback. I think you really know the materials. You've really gone deep into history. I particularly like the way, Andrew, that you referred back to some of the early political philosophers, and I think you know the material. One thing that we try to do is to push you a little bit. We try to get you off track. At times I was sort of hoping that you get a little bit more back to the relevance of Rome. But you compensated in other ways, going back to Montesquieu I can go through the whole list here, but I thought you were very well prepared.
I agree. I thought you did an extraordinary job. Well organized, and especially given a complicated question, your organization helped to save the day. There are some places I wish we could have pushed deeper. You've made me go back, and I guess the question I have in my own head is, what does Polybius look like after the American Revolution? Is he still Polybius? Or does his thinking have to change? And did the drafters of the Constitution simply repackage him in our constitutional system? Or did something revolutionary happen so that he was a mere shadow, but substantively they did something different? Just for you to think about, and you got me certainly thinking hard about it. The claim was that this is a regime form of government based on popular sovereignty. That means that only principles consistent with popular sovereignty, as they define a republic, power derived directly or indirectly from the people. I'm kind of wondering if that doesn't put an end to aristocratic and monarchical principles. Maybe not. Maybe you've got that one right. I'd push you to think a little more about this distribution of power horizontally and vertically. They sure as heck own horizontal distribution in 47 to 51. They get that. They get interest counteracting interest and ambition counteracting ambition. And you guys nailed that. I'm not sure how much ideologically the founders were committed to federalism as much as it was a deal forced upon them by the slave-holding states, and they're stuck with it. and I'm afraid that's how I read Federalist 39. Madison writes that in the form of a dialogue. He hates it. And so making it into a principle, I'm not quite so sure. But the fact that you got me thinking that way means I really owe you a huge gratitude, because not many people will get us to think about those kinds of things today. You just did a terrific job. Thank you.
Yes, and let me echo that. And looking over my notes, I realized how much you reflect the ambiguity and uncertainty of the situation. They were struggling against a lot of competing interests and competing concerns, chaos and order and freedom and all being important parts of that. I thought you reflected that well, the uncertainty of the founders and how they can make that work, and simply the political answers that they came up with at the time based on the experiences that they had grown up with and that they were having. So I appreciate that part of the conversation a great deal, and I enjoyed being part of this whole discussion with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.